My name is Kai Martin, but I went by a catchier moniker on YouTube. It was about privacy as well as branding. You might have seen my channel back in the day, but I'm not going to provide a link. Anyway, by December of 2021, it was profitable enough for me to quit the day job. That month's YouTube ad revenue was equal to a year's worth of earnings from the daily shit stain. Not its real name, believe it or not. My local newspaper was an endangered medium, eyeballed by greasy bundles of cod and chips more than humans. Let's put it that way. Moreover, freelance journalism comes without restrictions. I reported on whatever so pleased me. In the name of a scintillating story, I'd faced war criminals, traffickers, and next-door killers. As a young, steel-balled investigative journalist, I felt invincible, and that sort of adrenaline blinds a person to danger. It's why I wasn't afraid of Cedric Roberts. I should have been. Cedric was an ordinary man, an outwardly dull fellow whose profession I don't remember. He was interesting in only one way. The man claimed to have been misdiagnosed with obsessive-compulsive disorder. He claimed to perform rituals which really did stop bad things from happening. Now, that's a typical claim from sufferers of this illness. The atypical thing was that he claimed to serve something outside of him. He called it tall crawl. Rule number 1. Do whatever he bids, and do it twice if you doubt yourself. Rule number 2. Walk no fewer than 11 steps per hour. Rule number 3. Don't walk in the shade of a backwards tree. Rule number 4. No artificial light between 1 and 6 in the morning. Rule number 5. Snap the bird when it sings. Those were the 5 rules of life by which Cedric Roberts lived. Not rules imposed by an oddball employer. Not rules penciled on a scrap of paper. Rules whispered to Cedric in his head. Rules that I scribbled on my hand whilst doing research on his case. Everything started 3 months ago. In late June, my brother dumped a dollop of waste onto my lap, dressed it up as a vanilla sundae, and I swallowed it with ease. Why did I entertain him? Well, I always entertain him. I always support his crackpot ideas. Besides, it shouldn't have been possible for my brother to keep shoveling through that rock-bottom floor. But Andrea's always found a way. I sighed, scrolling through my YouTube channel's analytics. Views are down this month. We really need to come up with an exciting video for next week. Well, did you hear about Cedric Roberts? My brother asked. I nodded. Sure, the monster who killed his family. Andreas nodded. He braked at the town's train crossing, stepped out of the vehicle, locked the passenger doors. Then he put a brick on the accelerator and let the car roll through the barrier into the oncoming train. Witnesses said his wife and 2 daughters were banging on the windows and screaming. It was all over in seconds. The train pancaked the car and... Okay, Andreas, I interrupted, feeling nauseated. Anyway, he ended up in a psychiatric unit, my brother said. It's a horrible story. I have nothing to add that wasn't already covered by the paper, I said. My brother smiled. You do now. I was talking to our source at the station, and she... Just call her Holly, I said, rolling my eyes. Right. Well, Holly revealed something interesting, Andreas continued. And not just that you're absolutely smitten with her. I heard about your date to... Get to the point, I said, blushing. My brother smiled, then returned to a solemn expression. Cedric Roberts said that something else killed his family. Said that a higher being was punishing him for getting a compulsion wrong. He was diagnosed with schizophrenia and OCD. And that was it. I had to interview this man. Without even arranging an appointment, I slumped into my car and set off. It was about more than our connection to the case. Andreas and I had lost our mother to suicide 7 years earlier. She had been broken by her obsessive-compulsive disorder. It wasn't even about Cedric's murderous rampage. It was about the itch on the nape of my neck, one which burrowed deeply, like the tarmac, snaking through grooves in fields and mounds. A long country road that ascended towards a secluded psychiatric hospital. The ward was a gray blot atop a hilly landscape, one with 3 stories of tall glass pines lined up far too squarely. The building pained my eyes for a reason I did not know, yet trusted with unwavering certainty. It was a clearer warning than I'd ever seen, heard, or felt. My mind was telling me to turn back. Something watched me from one of the windows. Something I didn't see. Something that didn't belong.
"I've been his psychiatrist for less than 5 days,"
Dr. David Pendleton said after I entered the building and introduced myself.
"Dr. Rosetta Wright would have been more helpful, Mr. Martin. She was Cedric's specialist for 11 months.
Right. I'd like to speak to her then. May I have her details? I asked.
No,
Pendleton replied. I nodded. Because she'd rather not speak to a journalist?
because she's dead,
He bluntly answered. I felt it again. The primitive urge to turn back. The same instinct that had detected something worse than eyes watching me from the hospital windows. And I also inferred, from the tone of David's voice, that Dr. Rosetta Wright's death was linked to Cedric Roberts in some way. I feared that it might be linked in the worst way.
Did he kill her?
I near silently asked. Dr. Pendleton shook his head, then winced as if coming to his senses.
I'm not myself at the moment. I really shouldn't be talking to a journalist about any of this. Rosetta was a dear friend of mine, Mr. Martin. You're taking advantage of my grief by poking your nose into this.
I'm not trying to take advantage of you, I promised. This story means a lot to me.
I imagine it'll help your career,
the doctor cynically said. It's not that. My mother was an OCD sufferer, I replied, teeing up for the winning stroke. Her illness led down an awful path, Dr. Pendleton. She eventually took her own life. There came a long pause as the doctor cautiously chose his next words. He finally said,
If you really have no exploitative intentions...
I don't, I promised.
Fine,
Dr. Pendleton said.
I'll have to ask for Cedric's permission, of course.
The patient, surprisingly, was keen on the idea of talking to a journalist. Given his volatile nature, however, Dr. Pendleton thought it best to have members of staff physically restrain the man before I entered his room.
I'll let you conduct your interview privately,
the doctor said as we stood outside Cedric's room.
He's been docile today. That's the only reason I'm allowing this interview. But shout if you need me. I'll be right outside, Mr. Martin. Less than 5 yards away.
Sure. Separated from the family killer by a wooden door and a plastered wall, I thought, envisioning all of the ways in which the patient might butcher me before help could arrive. But I inhaled deeply, summoned every shred of my courage, and entered the white-walled cell labeled 307. Cedric Roberts was constricted by a taut leather belt around his midsection, but nothing could have restrained his untoward grin. The man sat cross-legged on a neatly made duvet. He was a strange sight. A 40-something-year-old sitting like a monk or a well-behaved schoolchild, but neither was the case. I knew what this supposed family man had done. A heinous act driven by a mind either evil or unwell. I still wasn't sure which, and that was what I needed to investigate. I wanted to disprove his claims of supernaturalism and grandeur. I needed to disprove it. Since I'd first glimpsed the hospital on the horizon, a prison which barely held this imposing man, I'd felt something I didn't know how to explain. A terror I desperately wanted to explain. Cedric would give me answers, but not the ones I wanted.
Kai Martin? The Kai Martin?
He mocked.
May I have an autograph?
I sat on a chair opposite his bed.
Nice to meet you, Cedric.
Do you know why I'm here?
This is a collab for your YouTube video.
the man replied, snorting with an entirely static face. I smiled uneasily. Honestly, I just want to uncover the truth.
Honestly?
Cedric repeated disbelievingly.
Yes, we must always have honesty, mustn't we, Kai?
Something stirred violently in my belly, as Cedric uttered a nickname I'd only ever been called by my mother. That fact, alongside the oppressive sensation of 307's watchful walls shrinking, filled me with a foreign strain of fear. I know what happened on that afternoon, Cedric. What made you kill your family? He smiled.
My beautiful Isabel called him Tall Crawl. He crawled up my body, you see? When you do what he says, he crawls, grows, feeds, until he is tall.
Tall Crawl, I softly said, sparking a sharp chill on my left forearm. It was only a child's bemusing name, as bemusing as my feeling of being watched by unseen things, not quite eyes. But some perplexing anomalies are borderline inexplicable. Some oddities are funny, like 4 buses arriving at once. Some oddities are terrible, like the fetal shape of a body that rose beneath Cedric's duvet. A shape that the patient roughly flattened with a thump of his hand, before massaging the bed slowly, uncomfortably. My heart throbbed at the sight I knew I hadn't imagined. And then, the man transformed his 2 longest fingers into striding legs, before marching them slowly up his right arm. And as he did, there came the sound of slow, clacking footsteps in the hospital hall. Footsteps sounding, in horrible harmony, with each stride Cedric's leg fingers took across his flesh. I was so distracted by the approaching footsteps that, in my state of terror, I barely noticed the pain. Only when the footsteps of some unseen figure halted at the door of 307, but were not accompanied by knocking knuckles, did a meek groan finally escape my lips. Bloody, crescent-shaped dents had been trodden into my left arm, as if I were Cedric's reflection. The wounds were in the exact spots the man's walking fingers had marked on his own skin. Impossible half-moon wounds inflicted by unseen puppet strings. "What have you done?" I wailed. But my lips only formed the shapes of the words. No sound escaped. My autonomy had been stripped by Cedric. And worst of all, he somehow heard or felt what I had silently screamed.
"I'm following his creed, Kai. Walk no fewer than 11 steps per hour,"
the man said, reciting his second rule. I looked down at the 11 deep cuts on my arm, forged by unclean fingernails. Then, I looked at the 5 rules I'd sloppily jotted on my palm the night before.
"Tall Crawl starts at your toes, you see,"
Cedric finally explained.
"He climbs up, and up, and up.
Up to your breast. Up to your frown. Up to the tippy-top of your crown," whispered his voice in my head.
Knock, knock."
As the man rapped his knuckles against an imaginary door, my brain matter squelched painfully. There came a dull ache from spectral fingers, too long to belong to Cedric, rummaging in my skull. I fearfully surveyed my paralyzed self in the anti-ligature mirror on the wall, behind the perturbing patient.
"He crawls along the wall,"
Mr. Roberts continued, rocking on the bed as I failed to scream for Dr. Pendleton.
"He crawls so tall. Please,"
I silently begged.
"My Isabel didn't mind,"
the man continued.
"Tall Crawl stops the bad things, Kai. You just have to do as he says."
"Bad things happen to your wife and daughters," I soundlessly uttered. Only air escaped my mouth, as I contended with the horror of being unable to speak.
"Because I broke the 3rd rule,"
Cedric whispered. displaying the first sign of anything vaguely resembling fright.
I stumbled into the shade of a backwards tree.
What is a backwards tree? I inwardly asked, lips moving silently in the mirror on the wall.
It isn't something that words fit around,
the man responded nonsensically, before offering a large smile.
It's real, Kai.
I nodded, wrestling with the force that bound me tighter than any belt, then mouthed, "What does he look like? This personification of your illness."
I don't have obsessive-compulsive disorder, Kai,
the patient calmly insisted. Humor me, Cedric, I thought.
He looks like so many things,
the man replied, proving that he had reached into my mind.
A coat hanging strangely on a hook, something that hides beneath fresh folds on your palms, maybe your own reflection lingering in the mirror after you walked away.
As if in dreadful response, something changed in my reflection. Two colorless, spindly hands sprouted from behind my head like weeds, belonging to a figure hidden behind me. One I am glad I didn't see, though I doubt it had a form to be seen. 10 fingers slithered across my face, beelining towards my open, screeching mouth. I jolted in fear and looked down to find that reality was no better than the mirror's illusion. Crawling across my chin were not fingers, but black, oval pellets. Titanic, writhing microbes. Living or unliving things that fell into my wide, soundless maw. When I looked back up at the mirror, jaw hanging limply, my reflection had changed again. My mirrored face did not look back at me with a smile. It did not look back at all, for there was no face left. A sunken pit sat in the middle of my featureless reflection, caving inwards from all sides, and forming an impossibly black hole at the center of my face, one which passed beyond the back of my skull. And it did not reveal the wall on the other side. It did not reveal anything that the human gaze knew how to decipher. But there was something in the blackness. I felt it.
You look pale,
Cedric whispered, drawing my gaze to him.
What is happening to me?
I silently croaked, looking back at my reflection to find it had returned to normal.
He said he would save my baby girl,
the patient said, ignoring me again.
My baby Isabel. And he did. She was stillborn, but she came back to life, because I did as Tall Crawl asked. And Izzy enjoyed 10 perfect years, which is better than none. I thank him every day.
I said nothing. Whether due to paralysis or choice, I do not know.
I like that you've written them down,
the patient eventually said, nodding at the set of rules inked onto my quaking hand.
You'll run out of skin eventually.
What do you mean? I mouthed, choking on fear, or perhaps slug-like entities wedged in my throat.
Are there more rules?
Cedric Roberts held a finger up to his lips and loudly shushed, but I gasped in bewilderment. His arms were still tightly bound in the restraining belt. How had one of his arms freed itself for a moment? Nothing in that place made sense, but the 11 curved cuts on my forearm told me that, at the very least, it had been no figment of my imagination.
I'll tell you what to do, Kai,
Cedric said.
He always tells. Dr. Wright didn't see that.
What happened to her? I soundlessly asked.
The 5th rule, Kai,
the man continued, avoiding all questions.
Snap the bird when it sings. I had to do that one little thing, or Isabel wouldn't have made it. I was scared, Kai, but the Tall Crawl blessed me with a bird to break. It fluttered on little legs through the door, smiling unknowingly and humming a tune.
fluttered on little legs, smiling. I silently choked in horror, haunted by his choice of words. The man, if he even were a man anymore, simply grinned at me. "Tall Crawl is not real, Cedric," I mouthed, trying to convince myself rather than him.
"I snapped the birdie,"
Cedric exhaled, as if the words were cathartic.
"Snapped it shut. And the Tall Crawl gave me Isabel. He saved her. But there are always more bad things to stop. Always more rules to follow. 6, 7, 8, 9.
I silently pleaded for him to stop.
"There are too many rules to count, Kai,"
the bound man giddily explained, rocking aggressively on the bed like a hard-shelled egg ready to hatch.
"It's only fair to do as he says. Only right, given what he does to keep me safe. Do you want to be safe, Kai? So no one ever gets hurt? Like your mother? Again? Andreas and Holly? They should be kept safe. You should keep them safe. Please, let me leave,"
I begged in my head.
"I shouldn't have come here." "No,"
the man taunted lowly, eyes twitching like things other than pupils.
"This is the place. You were always supposed to come here. To welcome the Tall Crawl into your heart."
An unseen pall hung over the boxy room. It clung to Cedric like a heavy fabric. The Tall Crawl. That was what I saw. It was not a man. It was not any one thing at all.
"He looks like so many things, Kai."
The man's words bounced off the walls of my skull as I shivered at shapes in my peripheral vision. I could already feel my feet tingling, could already feel something starting to drag its prickly, transparent form across the tops of my toes. A small crawl that would grow. It was too late. Whether I had wanted to welcome the Tall Crawl or not, he was there.
"Follow the rules, Kai,"
Cedric whispered, giggling.
"There are more than 5. There are always more."
I shot to my feet, falling for the illusion that the demon had given me back my freedom for a second, temporarily afforded me the illusion of independent will. It was a cruel joke that seemed to please Cedric Roberts, made him guffaw wildly as I tentatively pressed towards the exit.
"Bye-bye, Kai,"
the patient said. And then the man began to walk his fingers across his flesh once more. As he did, the duvet started to lift. That shape returned, with a barely human form, and crawled towards the edge of the bed, crawled towards an escape, crawled towards me. Screaming, with a voice box that finally worked, I scurried out of the door and down the corridor.
"Mr. Martin?"
Dr. Pendleton asked, gasping as he rose to his feet. I didn't tell him what I saw, didn't tell him what I felt, but the doctor followed me, cornering me into a conversation, and noticed the wounds on my left forearm, chastised me for trying to conceal them, chastised me for not seeking help. I'd hoped that the 11 cuts were figments of my imagination, but as I drove out of the car park, looking up at the windows of the hospital, it became clear that I hadn't imagined anything. Behind the window of 307, there stood Cedric Roberts, waving at me. And behind him, a silhouetted figure waved its far longer arm in unison with the patient, like some perverse puppet master. An arm without color, without texture, without substance. When I looked down, to see only one hand holding onto the steering wheel, I realized that my free one was waving back at Cedric Roberts. Holly's static voice poured through the car speakers. You and Andreas are going to get me in trouble. Relax, I said. We didn't discuss anything confidential. Well, what did you discuss? She asked. I paused, absorbing the world beyond my windscreen on the way home from the hospital. Driving in the other lane, seeing the countryside in reverse, the road seemed to have a freshly tarmacked personality. It felt different than before. Felt backwards in more than a literal sense. As I passed countless grand oaks lining the never-ending lane, I thought of Cedric's curse. The 5 rules that he'd bestowed upon me, plus any others the tall crawl might add. You've lost the fucking plot, I thought, clammy hands gripping the steering wheel. There is no tall crawl. I don't know what you saw in that room, but it wasn't real. Pull yourself together, Kai. There was, however, no denying the scarring tissue on my left arm. The 11 curved wounds. I frantically searched my memory vault. Searched for some memory of Cedric lunging forward, perhaps, and clawing away at my skin. But he hadn't. The wounds had been inflicted by the air itself, by invisible strings that the patient skillfully twirled in trained fingers. Kai? Holly asked. Are you still there? Yeah, I answered weakly. Kai? She pressed. Please, tell me what you and Cedric discussed so I don't have to worry about losing my job. Yes, officer, I said, trying and failing to lighten the tone. Lighten my own tone. We talked about the price of breaking his rules. He told me that he didn't want to kill his entire family. He had to kill them. Holly sighed. It's a horrible case. Are you okay? I swallowed my fear. I've interviewed worse people than Cedric Roberts. So have I, she started, sounding unconvinced. But he's a different breed. You know that. I hear it in your voice. I did, but I wasn't going to tell Holly that. Just as I wasn't going to tell her about the wounds on my arm. She was my friend. More than my friend. But she was also a law enforcer. One who was never really off duty, no matter how much she claimed otherwise. She sought justice in all areas of life, and I didn't want her to fight my battle. Didn't want Mr. Roberts to do anything awful to her, too. Besides, I knew I'd see Holly soon enough, and she would wrench the cat out of the bag, no matter how hard I tried to keep it hidden. I just needed time before that inevitable confrontation. Time to figure out what had happened to me. Time to figure out whether there might be a rational explanation for what happened in room 307. An explanation other than it being a supernatural force with mysterious wants. Not mysterious, I thought. It feeds on attention and control. Its sustenance came from obedience. From asinine rituals. Rule number 1. Do whatever he bids, and do it twice if you doubt yourself. Number 2. Walk no fewer than 11 steps per hour. Number 3. Don't walk in the shade of a backwards tree. Number 4. No artificial light between 1 and 6 in the morning. Number 5. Snap the bird when it sings. The ink on my palm had smudged from sweat, but I didn't need the rules in writing any longer. They were floating in my thoughts. Swimmers, planted either by my fearful subconscious or the long, spectral fingers that had fiddled with my brain, had slithered through my screaming lips. That wasn't real, I lied to myself. I really wanted to believe those warm, fuzzy fibs as I pulled into my driveway. Really wanted to sleep most of all, after a half-hour drive that felt eternal. I imagined myself waking up without a single memory of that awful visit to the psychiatric ward. Perhaps waking up without any memory of the Cedric Roberts case. I thought there might be a way to go back. Unbind myself from the tall crawl. Not real, I reminded myself once more as I unlocked my front door. My bed would wait. I'd forgotten that my younger brother, my housemate, had invited a dozen of our closest friends over for a summer barbecue. Strangely, however, I found that I didn't mind. There buzzed a soft, cooling frequency in my brain. Not quite a hit of dopamine, more so the release of tension, as if I doused my flaming mind with cold water, as if I'd finally tossed aside the hospital-grade belt restraining my thoughts. I sighed with relief and waved gleefully at my friends as I stepped into the house. I'm such an idiot. I was just having a weird day. That's all. I bought into Cedric's tall tale of a tall crawl. The temporary relief was perforated by a pang of realization. Rule number 2. Walk no fewer than 11 steps per hour. I just completed a ritual. Unknowingly, perhaps, but that didn't matter. I had done as instructed. That was why I felt better. Don't be silly, I thought, whilst greeting each of my friends. It wasn't silly, though. I knew that. That foreboding feeling on the drive home had been a warning, a reminder that I was on the verge of breaking one of the crawl's laws. I was struggling to wrestle with that notion any longer. Then I became consumed by one of my oldest fears, the possibility that I might have inherited my late mother's disorder. There is a genetic link with that illness, after all, I reminded myself. But Cedric had been clear. Very clear. This was no illness. The crawl was tangible, though it wore different skins. To disobey it came with hauntingly real consequences, unlike my mother's illness. Her death was pretty fucking real, I thought. Hey, Kai, Holly said, pulling me out of the trance. You look a little pale. I smiled. I just forgot about tonight, that's all. She laughed. Yeah, after you hung up, I realized I should have reminded you. I had a feeling you might have blanked. People only just got here, though, so don't worry. It's not that, I said. I'm just tired. Holly frowned. Are you really okay, Kai? You said you interviewed worse people than Cedric Roberts. I know, I whispered, lips twitching. She nodded, as if to say that she'd already known. I didn't bother attempting to tell white lies in front of Holly's face. She was a detective, after all. And she'd clearly detected something in my voice during the call, given her incessant questioning. It was even harder to shrug her off in the flesh. I tugged at the sleeve of my jacket, hoping the wounds on my arm were concealed. That was a conversation I did not want to have. Much like the Cedric-themed one I knew was coming. Did he threaten you? Holly asked. What makes you think that? I replied. He threatened one of my colleagues. Well, no, he didn't threaten me. I lied. We just talked a lot. In great detail. Holly nodded, but the frown persisted. I knew she wasn't buying it. She knew full well that I'd heard numerous horror stories from killers over the years. Heard of the awful things they'd done to other human beings. Cedric's murderous confession was ghastly, but not the ghastliest. What made him so frightening was the intention behind his actions. The act of serving something beyond the earthly realm. That was certainly new. I found that I actually wanted to be psychologically unwell. That would have been an easier pill to swallow. Obsessive-compulsive disorder is treatable. I didn't know whether the curse had a cure. It was evident, however, that the tall crawl existed. A force that hungered for nothing but my servitude. It would feast on my undying loyalty. And punish any mistake, I thought, going over the rules in my head. The night passed in a blur, as did my thoughts. Racing, unintelligible thoughts born of fever daydreams. As hot fear coursed through my blood, I thought of Mum. Knew she'd battled something different, yet not dissimilar. And for the first time ever, I let go of the anger, the blame. She'd been tortured for years, decades. I was simply amazed that she had made it through as many days as she did. I love you, she'd promised me, only an hour before she ended it all. A little after 1 in the morning, I woke in a sweat. It took me fewer than 10 seconds to process what was wrong. It wasn't simply the sound of rustling from downstairs that had woken me. It was an alarm bell, ringing from a clotted compartment of my brain. A bell that, amidst all the neural noise, I'd missed earlier. Rule number 4. No artificial light between 1 and 6 in the morning. I turned off every last light in the house. I was certain of it. But the rule was vague, of course. Intentionally so. Tall crawl gives no clarity. It speaks in riddles, deceives, longs for us to fumble, so that it might exact its devious design. As I tore out of bed, ears throbbing, I was acutely aware of that sensation from the evening before. The warm tension I'd felt during the journey home. The fear that I'd forgotten something. I had checked all of the lights, I thought, heart pounding as I slipped downstairs. Unless I should have turned off every single light on the planet. No artificial light? What does that even mean? When I made it to the blackened lobby of my house, not daring to flick a single switch, I noticed something. A pinprick of redness spilling out from the black living room. The television standby light. Fuck, I thought. Is that what I missed? I realized it had to be. The rest of the house was entirely dark. I had taken the rule seriously, making sure to inspect every room after our friends had gone home. I darted into the living room, bludgeoning my shin on the sharp edge of the coffee table. Then I dropped to my knees and crawled towards the television stand. I had to kill that red glow. I rummaged around behind the stand, guided only by moonlight and street lamps pouring through the lounge's windows. It didn't feel sufficient to turn off the switch. I searched for the plug in the extension sockets. I wanted to remove any reasonable doubt. No artificial light between 1 and 6 in the morning. But as I dipped my fingers into the entanglement of cables, the flesh on my arm started to shiver, started to sprout tiny bumps. I let my hand lie still, stopped searching in the heap of technology for the extension sockets. Then, I screamed. The cables continued moving. The dark, worm-like clump surged and grew, forming a hunching body. One that seemed on the verge of standing, but instead chose to squat in the darkness.
"He looks like so many things,"
Cedric had said. I tried in vain to free my hand and forearm from its snare, but the living cable seized me, cut into my flesh. Fresh scars formed alongside the bloody dents inflicted by Cedric Roberts, and I was certain, in my peripheral vision, that the red standby light had moved. As if it were the eye of the crawl, watching me from the black. I thought that would be my end, but there is no end for its servants. Only greater depths of horror. The cables released me. I massaged my arm and scooted backwards across the carpet in fear. The cluster of cables did not pursue me. The silhouetted man shrank and sank into the carpet, resting against the wall in a fetal position. Then, to my great surprise, the television's plug disconnected of its own accord. The red light faded as its shadowy eyelids shut, and I dragged my shivering body across the floor. As I moved towards the window, the outside light started to reveal the new marks on my arm. Not meaningless fingernail prints, as had been left by Cedric, but something of significance. Awful words were etched into my flesh. Andreas? Or Holly? "I won't," I whispered, understanding what it meant. As if in response, fresh lines formed in my flesh. A word was dashed, and a new one was written above to form a new message. Andreas and Holly. It did not need clarity, as much as I hadn't needed clarity with the list of rules. I knew that a punishment awaited. It was sinisterly straightforward, actually. I had failed to complete a ritual, much like Cedric, and a bad thing was coming. Then came the crunch of grass beneath shoes, signaling an approach. It neared the living room window, below which I was slouching against the wall. Each crunch far louder than the last, and then the steps stopped. Something stopped right before the window. Heart drilling at a brutal beat, I did not hesitate. There was no escaping it. I had to face my fate and be done with it. I shot up and looked out at my front yard. Of course, there was no one to be seen.
He looks like so many things.
My eyes started to water as I spotted something. Not out of place, for it had never been placed there at all. Andreas and I are not gardeners. Our front yard has always been empty. But there it stood. A small ash tree in the grass. A pale brown trunk with an unnervingly flat texture. As if it were skin, not bark. Old and withered skin, perhaps, but skin. And the leaves? Neither green nor any natural color, left me with a wretched feeling in my gut. Backwards. I don't know how to explain it, but the tree was undoubtedly backwards. There are no words that make sense of such a thing, because it's an impossibility. Don't you think I know that? A tree has no front, no back. It was, nonetheless, backwards. Reversed somehow. It wasn't even a tree. That was the terrifying truth I wanted to ignore. As the fleshy bark danced with slight movements, much like the cables, I knew it was the tall crawl. And at the foot of the trunk lay the unconscious bodies of the two people who meant most to me. Andreas and Holly. I was supposed to choose, but the options had been stripped from me. Your fault for denying him, I thought. And then the urge began. Both of my loved ones would perish at my hand, though I had no say in the matter. It was starting. I was being consumed by the insidious intent that had cursed Cedric, that had forced him to kill his loved ones. And the very same murderous urge hauled me out the front door in the early, unlit hours of the morning. There lay a blade on the paved porch, and I bent forward to scoop it up without a moment's hesitation. Then I strolled across the grass toward my two loved ones. They lay in fetal bundles, like the cluster of living room cables, neatly placed in the well-lit grass beside the ash tree's shadow. Don't walk in the shade of a backwards tree. As I raised the knife, preparing to lunge, I started to wrestle with the urge of the crawl. With that foreign motivation imprinted upon me, I knew I didn't have to do this. Didn't have to suffer a punishment for not obeying meaningless rules. Didn't have to obey the rules at all, in fact. It's weak, I thought, eyeing the sickly bark of the tree. And I recalled how fragile and vulnerable the tall crawl had seemed, as a resting pile of black cables. Less intimidating than it had been in the hospital room. When I disobey, I weaken it, I realized. Don't walk in the shade of a backwards tree. That rule rang in my mind. I eyed the ash tree's shadow, which was cast to the side of my two friends. Then I smiled, seeing what I believed to be a way forwards, before taking a well-meaning stride into the shade. Dread knifed my heart, and a boiling liquid flooded my skull, enveloping me in fear beyond fear. I had willingly defied a rule, willingly gone against the bidding of the crawl. Rule number 1. Do whatever he bids, and do it twice if you doubt yourself. 2 rules defied in one fell swoop. However, that pull remained. That urge to do its bidding. I wasn't cured. There followed a sense of freedom, but it drowned in all-consuming terror. I had felt triumphant upon seeing rot settling into the bark of the tree, but I was shriveling as painfully as the crawl. I screamed, as my limbs started to snap into jagged, angular formations. I lost any remaining free will, and by the time I accepted that, I'd already lunged down, already plunged the steel knife into Andreas's chest, plunged again, again, and again. My brother woke with a sputter, which somehow did not wake Holly, and blood filled his gaping mouth. I sobbed as I lay atop him, sobbed as I felt the tree shift and creak above us. "What have I done?" I cried.
"Came through the window,"
Andreas whispered, shivering as he eyed the branches above us. "Holly, help!" My sister began to stir, opening her eyes with a shake. Then she screamed at the sight of my brother, screamed at the tree, which started to twist and spiral into the dirt. "I didn't do it," I promised, watery eyes begging her to believe me. Holly knew. Much like Andreas, she had seen and felt something which contradicted all reason.
"Mom was here,"
she whimpered, curling up into a tighter ball on the grass. I'd never seen her so fragile.
"Holly?"
I gently began.
"No,"
she said to herself, shaking her head and changing her mind.
"It wasn't her."
The ground quaked, swallowing the last of the thing pretending to be an ash tree, swallowing me. Before I had a chance to do a thing, my brother, still alive, though barely, form sank into the grass, joining the tree in some treacherous underworld. I clung to him, hoping to save him, hoping to suffer with him, at the very least. But the blades of grass closed, sealing him away. Holly and I dug for an hour, trying to reach him in a blind, traumatized panic. But he was gone. I had not defeated the tall crawl. To starve it was only the beginning. For when I'd taken one step forward, defying its law, I took 2 steps backwards. I fully succumbed to the will of the crawl.
"I murdered him,"
I whispered to Holly as the sun dawned. She shook her head and held me in her arms. The months since that day have been torturous. I know there is a way out, but I don't see it. Not yet. I try to remind myself of what I saw. That the tall crawl is not an impervious, omnipotent being, and it certainly does not prevent bad things from happening. It causes them. I keep telling myself I need the crawl to keep my loved ones safe, but I think my mind has twisted the truth. Does it need me? Become a channel member today for early access, bonus videos, and special emojis only available to members. Check out the description below or click the join button for more info. If you'd like another way to help support the channel, please consider joining my Patreon page at patreon.com/Jordan Group Horror. As a patron, you'll get access to bonus videos and content. You'll be credited at the end of every video going forward, and if you decide to stay for 3 months, I'll name a character after you, which will be featured in a Hollow's End story. Links to join the Patreon are in the description. Thanks everyone for listening. Please like, subscribe, and comment to help the channel continue to grow. And see you again next time at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Hope you have a great night.